Hi folks, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about some of the materials that you worked with this week, just to give you kind of an understanding of where I'm coming from with it. Remember these after the week videos, so these wrap-up videos are optional, and I'm also posting a few materials that you might be interested in looking at, but they're not part of the curriculum, they're just kind of a wrap-up. Thinking about the exercise that you watched with the blackboard, where we did the half empty board and half full board, something I'd like you to take away from that is recognizing that the perspective that you come from, the experiences that you've had really shape the way you look at the world. And particularly, not just that your experiences shape the way you see the world, but specifically that when you're coming from a place of power and privilege, you really can't see stuff as it's happening. And that theme is going to come up for us quite a few times. So in my in-person class, I always talk about how what side of the board you're on really determines how you're going to see a phenomenon. So if you're standing on the half-empty side of the board, you're really kind of not going to get it. When you're speaking from a place of power and privilege, you're going to be pretty ignorant about what that phenomenon is like. That's by definition, and we'll talk later on about why that is. But one thing that's really important is that you start to question yourself and say, am I really the best person to talk about ableism when I don't actually experience that oppression? It could be a good idea for you to sit back and listen. So that's a new skill and a new practice that you want to get into and say, when it comes to classism, maybe I'm really not the best person to be speaking about this because I benefit from that particular oppression. Another set of things that you worked with this week was the concept of gender expression and sexual orientation. And the reason I wanted you to think about whether there was a link between them is because we have a pretty steady stereotype in this culture in that we kind of link up the way that people look with how we think that they're paired up. So the heterosexual understanding is that women who look very masculine are more likely to be queer. And that's something we want to start getting away from. It's recognizing that people come in all kinds of shapes and their gender expressions are all over the board. So systematically, we see queer women that are presenting in a very feminine way being ignored. So sometimes we call that femme erasure, where when women present in a very feminine way, they're assumed to be heterosexual, which is problematic. Likewise, when men present in a very masculine way, we kind of assume that they're not queer. We assume them to be heterosexual. So we want to start getting away from these associations because they're more based on stereotypes than truth. And those stereotypes can be really damaging. One last thing I really want to get into is the biological arguments that were in the Upside Down story, this notion of the delicate testicles. They're funny. They cause a laugh and a stir in folks as they hear about this idea. But one of the reasons I really love this story and this argument is getting to the basis of the biological arguments. So we hear a lot of biological arguments to justify sexism. It's one of the oppressions that uses a lot more biological arguments than other ones. People say, well, men and women are just really, really very different, and therefore we should expect very different things from them. Because, women's bodies make the babies. And this is where we get into that biological thing and say you can accept the premise, but not necessarily accept the leap that comes with it. So sure, mostly it's women's bodies who make the babies. That doesn't need to mean that they're going to be the ones who raise them for 20 years straight. Just the fact that testicles are very delicate doesn't necessarily mean that we need to hole up men in a house because they need protection. That leap is something we want to start questioning and say, yes, we all agree that testicles are really quite delicate when it comes to pain, and they probably shouldn't be taking very direct hits. From there, I'm not really necessarily going to agree with you that it's going to be likely that we're going to put men in a house to keep them still and protected. So I bring this up because the biological arguments can seem really obvious and kind of difficult to counter. So you want to kind of get in the habit of saying, we could have come up with a whole different set of biological arguments to pretty much come up with the opposite of conclusion of what you're saying. It just depends on which argument you're going to grab. Biological arguments are tricky, not just because they're hard to refute, but they seem kind of unquestionable. It seems like if you accept the premise, you got to accept the conclusion, which you don't. one of the bigger problems with them is that they're some of the most dangerous arguments. As soon as we start saying, well, this is justified in biology, this is just the way it is, this is natural and normal, it seems unchangeable. It seems that it is the only way it ever could be. It's unquestionable, unchangeable, and it has been used to justify the worst atrocities in history. So from a biological argument, it's a quick leap to talk genocide. This is pretty much how we justified racism in the past, to say these people are inferior, they are biologically different, they can't help it, they'll just never grow into being full human beings. This is the dehumanization part. And from there, the leap into, therefore we should sterilize them, or jail them, or kill them, isn't that far. So we want to keep an extra eye on the biological arguments and be ready to start questioning the things that we assumed to be absolute truths. I hope you're having a great start of your week, and I will see you next week.